So hello, everybody. We're glad to have you here. And we're going to be recording this session so that those of your friends who can't be here tonight, they can always watch it on Stow TV. But we're glad that you're here tonight because you get to ask the live questions of our speaker. Dr. Alice Vey has been working since 2018 for the Surfrider Foundation, which I have begun, it's one of those things. I hadn't heard of Surfrider until I began to hear about Alex. And then I met Alex in Hudson, and he gave a great session. And Hudson, as some of you may know, is, I don't know, 2 years ahead of Stow in terms of addressing plastics. And he was great, but I was going Surfrider Foundation. Since then, I found out that Surfrider has been doing incredible work on plastics campaigns since 2018, and Alex has been in the middle of it. They've successfully, I don't know what you call it, launched, run, whatever, 20 or more campaigns. We're here at the beginning with our first campaign. And so it's great to have an expert with us. That's his voluntary job. He has a day job too, but we're calling upon his volunteer work. So we're very glad to have him here. Thank you, Alex, for giving us of your time and expertise tonight. And questions. Yeah, as we go through, you can put your questions in the chat or hold them till we get to the Q&A time. That's up to you. But the chat box is open if you choose to put a question in there. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to catch it. Otherwise, you can ask it live as we reach the end for the presentation.
All right. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Good evening. Rick, thank you very much. And JL, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And it's my pleasure to speak with you here in Stow. I am from Sudbury and I'm currently living in Acton. So this is very much my neck of the woods. So it's really a pleasure to be able to share some things about plastics and also plastics reduction's work to folks who are interested in this subject and looking to make a difference in your own community. So as
one housekeeping, Alex, before we go, everybody should put themselves on mute until we get to the discussion at the end.
Yes, please. So as Rick mentioned, just to start off with a little bit of a very brief intro about what Surfrider Foundation is. We are a national environmental organization, and our mission is to help people protect and enjoy the world's ocean, waves, and beaches. We think that's actually a very unique combination because many organizations are solely focused on, protecting, but we believe very strongly that nature is not about putting in a box to be looked at, right? It's something to be enjoyed and experienced actively. So we definitely work in combining those things because we believe that you protect what you love, right? So if you're out there experiencing the ocean, you know what there is to love and what there is to protect, but you also see the challenges that face it. And so that is a very unique combination and something that I'm proud to be able to share with all of you. As I mentioned, we are a national-wide organization, and we do have professional staffers in various technical areas, but locally at the chapter level, we are all volunteers. So I have a day job, my colleagues have day jobs, and we do this sort of in a volunteer capacity. We're active in about 5 different main action areas, but today we're going to be talking mostly about plastics. Here in the state of Massachusetts, we actually have 2 chapters, Massachusetts chapter, which covers most of the state, as well as a new chapter that's focused on the Cape and Islands. And today, again, the topic will be plastic pollution. So one of the key things that we do is, I'll be honest, I'm not really here to tell you what to think, because honestly, I believe that if we lay out some facts and some information about this topic, everyone here is more than capable of thinking about it, being thoughtful, and coming to their own conclusions. And in many respects, what we're actually after is just for people to be, thoughtful about the topic. And that's actually a really core part of what we do as an organization. We run beach cleanups to help people see the problem sort of live out in the wild. We do educational programming with adults and kids. We do lobbying efforts where we speak with our elected officials. And so in all of those respects, right, we're helping people to sort of see an issue, think about it, and understand it. And whether it's sort of looking for the problems in the small spaces of our own lives or looking at it as a bigger issue, right? That's what we do. And so that's something that I'm looking forward to share with you all today.
Get to the place where you switch emails.
All right, so let's take a step back. So this is actually a Life magazine article from 1955, and the article is called "Throwaway Living." Back in 1955, which is actually a little bit before my father was born. So it's been a while, but it is very much the advent of consumer plastics. And what you can see here is sort of them imagining a world where people no longer have to do the dishes, where you could just like use something once, throw it away, and never think about it again. Right, this really is the era. This was really sort of the leading edge of an era where people stopped thinking about fixing things and durable things, and really started looking at a world in which, oh, we've got these new class of materials called plastics that are cheap, that are made from abundant fossil fuels that we can just sort of use, dispose, and then take away the inconvenience of our lives. And this is really just sort of a vision of the world that was sort of being demonstrated by this magazine article. And if you sort of fast forward a bit from 1955 until today, in many respects, that vision has like come true, right? If you think about from the moment that you wake up, where you hit your alarm clock, whether it's on your phone or whether it's one of those alarm clocks on your nightstand, brushing your teeth in the morning, grabbing a snack, driving to work, plastic is absolutely everywhere around us. And what's on the screen here really is just a small sampling, but like if you just take a moment and think about how commonly we come into this class of materials, it truly is remarkable how much of a fraction of our material world that this makes up. And the fact is, it's relatively inexpensive, it's durable, and there's a lot of things that make plastics appealing. And frankly, that is a big part of why it's become such an ubiquitous part of our lives. But if we take a step back, right, and ask ourselves, okay, fine, you do have this material that is really relatively inexpensive and durable. Does it have drawbacks? And unfortunately, answer absolutely is yes, right? Like, so we know that we're facing a climate crisis. We know that one of our main needs is to sort of work our way away from our addiction to fossil fuels. And so plastics are made from petrochemicals. That's just really that's really just a fact of those. And so that's a problem. Many of you will have been inspired by the issues that plastic poses to wildlife, right? So, for example, and then from a municipal standpoint, right, that thing in the middle there is a picture of recycling machinery that's been completely tangled up by plastic bags, and then somebody's got to go in there and cut that loose in order to get the machinery working again. On the bottom left, we've just had this big sort of slushy snowstorm. We all know what flooding does in our driveways and so forth. But if you have plastic bags out in the environment, you're going to see things like drains getting clogged and so forth. But I think really the most fundamental sort of insanity around plastics is the idea that we're going to take something that is light, durable, and strong and made out of a non-renewable resource, and then produce all of these products that we sort of use for just a few moments and then throw away. I think that's sort of the fundamental insanity here. And so one of the things I just really want to highlight about plastics is, I'm not really in a position of wanting to say, hey, plastics are evil, because there's a lot of things in our world that work because of plastics. what I want to encourage people to think about is the idea that it doesn't make sense. It fundamentally doesn't make sense for us to take something that is durable, and then use it only just and made out of a non-renewable resource, and just use it for a few moments and then throw it away, right? That really is the sort of fundamental insanity around disposable and single-use plastics. Let me ask a quick trivia question. All right, so this is slightly interactive, so feel free to throw your answer into the chat if you wanted to give a sense. So I have statistics, and my question is, for how much plastic waste on average does an American person generate each year? And I'm talking about sort of every man, woman, and child, right? So every member of the population, and taking the amount of plastic that the country generates. So that is, the answer is in pounds. And so I just want to take it, I'll just give you a second to think about it. If you're motivated, throw an answer in the chat. Otherwise, you know, we'll just give it a second. I see 10, I see 40, I see 2,000, I see 200. So we got a pretty wide range here, right? So their actual answer is 218 pounds per person per year, right? So just to think about that for a second. I, as a person, do not weigh 218 pounds, but no, some of us do, right? So that's about a person-sized ball of plastic that you can imagine that each of us on average generates every single year. And then imagine how much of a burden it would be if we had one of those for every year that we've been alive, right? So this is actually the most recent data that's available that I found, because unfortunately the EPA has stopped publishing this report in 2020. But this is just to give you a sense of the sort of scale of the issue, right? So when I say that we are seeing plastic everywhere and we're using plastic in enormous quantities, it's not really like an edge case problem. Like this is truly a significant amount of material. And if you take 218 pounds and multiply that across our population of some 330 million people, you know, it really puts into perspective what sort of scale that we're talking about with plastics in this country. Going on. So this truly has been the growth of plastics. Again, this is just another graph just to sort of emphasize it. But you know, starting in 1960, you know, 1955 was when that Life article was. There was fairly small amounts of plastic being generated, and the number has only basically grown year over year until, again, 2018 in this figure, where this country generated around 35 million tons. Again, that's 2,000 pounds, so billions of pounds of plastic. And one of the things that you're going to hear a lot when you start having conversations with folks is, oh, you know, why don't we just recycle our way out of this problem? No, think that this would not be a problem if we all just sort of like improve the way we recycle. So I'm going to add back a line on this figure that I sort of edited out. So this is just going to show the recycling curve that sort of goes over the same period of time. And that's this blue curve here on the bottom. So the orange curve is the amount of plastics that we generate as a country year over year. And the blue is the amount that we have collected, that we have successfully recycled. It's a big gap, right? We're talking dramatic multiples. And yes, it's true, right? You may hear folks from the industry saying things like, oh, we've managed to double or triple the amount of recycling that we've done over the last few decades. And that's true, right? You've gone from sort of 1 million to 3 or 4 million tons. That's not nothing, but it's completely dwarfed by the growth in the rate in which we're generating plastics. And so I really just wanted to share this figure because it shows the systematic scale of the problem, right? This is not something that, you know, people have been trying and we've managed to push up our recycling rates. But do you honestly believe that the solution is that we're going to be able to increase our recycling rates by a factor of 10 instantaneously in order to sort of catch up to all of this generation that we have? You know, that's kind of an implausible world, right? So this is really pushing us towards the conclusion that the way that we need to the way that we want to sort of reconcile this balance between this material is actually just generating less material. right? The only solution is to systematically look at ways that we can generate less material. Because while recycling is a part of the solution, it's true, it is far and away from being the most important part of the solution. And so this really highlights the fact that we're talking about systemic problems on a societal level, right? This isn't about you, Rick, like doing a little work, recycling a little harder, trying a bit harder to deal with your own personal part of this. It's a big societal problem at a big societal scale of tens of millions of tons a year. So, and then I really want to just sort of end this sort of segment here, right? By going back to the article, right? The title of that article in the 1955 Life magazine was "A Throwaway," right? The idea that you might use these plastic plate or a straw or something, and then you put it into a magical bin. And again, depends on what town you're in, but maybe the blue bin or the green bin that you put out on your curb. And then the problem just goes away, right? It becomes no longer your problem. The fact that I want to emphasize is that there really is no away when it comes to plastics, right? Sometimes, to be fair, we do beach cleanups and we find that when we dig through the nooks and crannies, you find lots of stuff that have been left behind by beachgoers. And that's an example of when things aren't going right. But even when things do go right, when they get put into the bin and get taken away to the transfer station, they end up in these giant piles in these material recovery facilities. And if you think that the idea of sorting through all of this to find the useful material is challenging, the fact is it is challenging, right? The idea that you have to sort through all of this trash bit by bit to find the useful materials to recycle, that's a real technical challenge. And again, even if we found machines and ways of doing that faster, the solution just isn't at the same scale as the problem. Right. And then so you end up with plastics that are in landfills, right? So there is no way. It's just, in this case, it's just ending up there buried for the foreseeable future. Or as more often happens to our waste here in Massachusetts, a lot of it gets burned. Right. So this is just one example of an incinerator facility and sort of famous / infamous one in Saugus, Mass, where the material that you would see in the materials recovery facility that can't be sorted through, that does get burned. And, you can contemplate what happens to the chemicals and to the emissions that are released from a facility such as this. Right. So the fact about plastics is you can put them in the bin, but it's not magic. There is no away where the problem just disappears. It's just a question of the problem transfers from you, consumer, from the producer to the consumer to somewhere else, right? And I want to say the latest statistics show that worldwide, so we actually probably do a better job of this here in Massachusetts and in most of the US, but worldwide, about 25% of plastic produced sort of escapes from this sort of contained system of landfills and incinerators and ends up in the environment. So there is really a question of what then happens to it? What are the problems? So just as a fair warning, I'm going to show a couple images that some people might find a little bit distressing involving animals that have died. So just fair warning. So I think many people are brought to the plastic problem by some type of image like this, right? The top left is an albatross in Midway Atoll. That's a very sort of canonical image of a bird who's died with its stomach full of plastic because plastics actually emit chemicals which confuse seabirds into thinking that it's food and that they fill their bellies with things that are unhelpful to their survival, and then they end up, dying. The classic six-pack rings, right, that used to be on a lot of soda, fortunately, much less so, right? That is a box turtle or painted turtle that has ended up trapped in one and in a dire situation. Many of you will remember the viral video of a sea turtle with a straw up its nose, right, getting pulled out by some marine biologists. And then the classic image of a plastic bag substituting for a jellyfish in a turtle's vision and becoming part of its diet, right? So many people are brought to this issue by these sort of big animals that are harmed by plastic waste that ends up in the environment, and especially the marine environment. But At some level, the whole problem is a little, once the stuff starts getting out into the environment, it's actually even a little bit more sinister than that, right? So the big animals, the turtles, the birds, those are the ones you can see. But there really is a tendency for plastic in the natural environment to not break down into harmless pieces, but to break up into just smaller and smaller bits of plastic. In the industry or in the field of science, these are called microplastics. And because of the way that the oceans circulate, there are specific regions, there are 5 sort of specific areas within the center of the oceans where the plastic debris tends to accumulate. And many of you might have heard of things like words like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, right? That might be something that you've heard of in your study or in your consumption of the media. But I think that actually gives the wrong impression. Certainly there is like big stuff floating on the surface. That's true. But I think the scarier bit of it is that a lot more of what's there in the garbage patch is actually more like a cloud or a fog or a smog of small plastic particles floating through the water column. There's in fact a really, really powerful National Geographic piece, if people are interested in looking that up, where a long distance swimmer describes swimming through with boat support and so forth, like swimming through these areas of the ocean where the plastic tends to accumulate and describing it as swimming through a fog or a soup of tiny particles. And that's actually scarier to me personally than sort of the idea of, a plastic water bottle floating on the surface, because that's really getting into the heart and the base of our food chain. That sort of supports like all life on this planet. And you're really getting into this sort of idea that these tiny bits of plastic, if they start displacing the sort of base of the food chain, that's the stuff that's sort of really concerning big picture and long term. Here's another sort of issue about plastics in the environment, right? So plastics chemically are kind of made out of oily substances, or, they're made of natural gas or they're made of oil. And so they tend to attract other sort of like oily substances. And those tend to include a lot of organic pollutants, PCBs, PAHs. So there's a lot of an alphabet soup of things that we don't want in our bodies. But one of the chemical characteristics of the plastics that when they end up in the ocean is that they actually can absorb these materials from the water and concentrate them. So this is an image from a study showing these pellets that have been sort of left out at sea for different lengths of time. And as the length of time has increased, you can actually see your eye, the color of the material changing. And sort of through analysis, you can show that that is actually these pollutants being absorbed onto the plastic and concentrated to levels that are far, far higher than what they would be just in the water around them. In fact, there's a few studies, right, where people are interested in understanding the pollutant concentration in the water, and their solution to like measuring it is just to like put bits of plastic bag into the ocean and then collect them after various periods of time. So these particles are attracting chemicals in the ocean, including pollutants. They're floating around like a smog in the oceans, and they're getting mistaken for food by big animals and small animals. This I don't think I need to sort of connect all the dots for you, right? Like this is scary and this is a problem. I've been talking with plastics for people for a bunch of years, right? And a lot of folks hear all this and they still think, oh yeah, this is kind of distant, right? We live in Stow or Sudbury. The ocean is miles away. Like this is a sort of a distant problem to us. But many of us consume seafood and many of us consume other foods, right? And I think this is an image from a study showing that the plastics are ending up in our food. So this particular fish had 17 pieces of plastic in its stomach, and then this is actually an advertisement from Surfrider that they published a few years ago, right? Reminding us that whatever ends up in the ocean ends up back in ourselves eventually. And it's happening through the food, the food we eat, it's happening through the water that we drink. If you go and look carefully enough these days, you'll find plastics in drinking water, you'll find plastics in seafood, you'll find plastics in the organs of our body, you'll find plastics in human placenta. This stuff is getting everywhere. It's in all of us. Now, you can argue about the details of studies, but no, there are studies out there suggesting that the average person ends up consuming, a credit card worth of plastic every week or every month or something like that. These are materials that there is no away, right? They are getting out into the environment, they're fragmenting, they're ending up everywhere, and they're ending up back in us. So even if you feel like, the ocean's a distant idea, or, plastics probably aren't, this is something that, you should be thinking about. That's the case that we're trying. All right, so that was about, let's just say, 25 minutes of doom and gloom. And so at this point, you're probably wondering a little bit around, what can I possibly do about this situation? So this is the point in the presentation where, we've broken things down, and then now I want to try to build ourselves back up, not just to the point where it's like, okay, well, everything is bad, there's nothing we can do, we should just deal with it. There is stuff that we can do, and that's what I want to talk about. First and foremost, I just want to remind folks that, this is true with the climate, this is true with our political system, this is true with plastics. Now, a lot of things have gone suboptimally. But the truth is, it's really important for us to remember that there is so much that's still worth protecting out there, right? If you get a chance to explore this world, whether it's the mountains or the ocean, right, to explore the relationships in our communities, there is so much out there that's worth protecting. And I think it's first and foremost very important for all of us to remember that even amidst doom and gloom, right, we are fighting for something. We're not just fighting against it. This is actually a diversion from a slightly different event that our organization does, that Surfrider does. We actually do an annual event called Stow, where we bring kids from underserved communities and bring them out into the water to give them a chance to experience surfing and enjoy it. But I just thought this was a really good metaphor. So I'm just going to hope you'll bear with me for a second. This is Liam. He was one of the participants at our event 2 years ago. And this is his first moment on a surfboard, and he is not having a good time. You can see that look on his face, see that death grip. That is someone who is in a new situation and is panicking a little bit and is not sure what's going to happen. And I actually think that Liam's a really, really good analogy for all of us in uncertain times. But through the work that our organization does, we've got awesome volunteers. We sort of provide them a safe space to experiment. We provide direct support. We teach them a few tricks and tips and ideas on how to do things. You can actually take that panicked, uncertain kid and turn him into somebody in just 45 minutes, mind you, in real life, into somebody who is genuinely enjoying their experience out in the water. So what I'm hoping to do with this presentation is to be a little bit of that guide, a little bit for you to direct the energy that you're feeling, or that all those feelings you feel about those facts and statistics and figures I just shared. And hopefully we can turn that into something positive and productive. So what can we do about this? I think it's pretty obvious. Personal choices are important, right? I think just statistically, many of you who would spend time on a Wednesday evening at a plastics presentation are already thinking about, oh, well, I'll bring a reusable bag to the grocery store. I'll bring my own water bottle. I'll say no to the straw, things like that. And don't get me wrong, that stuff is really important because those are the seeds socially that get change to happen. But I also just really want everyone to remember that this is a big societal level problem that requires societal level solutions. And even though the personal choices do matter, we're going to need solutions that are bigger than any one of us individually can drive. Does that make sense? We got to use the tools of our society in order to solve problems that are at the scale of our society. So even though we want to do what we can, I actually find it's really important to remind folks, no, be thoughtful, right? Think about what you're using. Think about whether you're using a disposable item that you don't need to, or maybe you do need to. But it's also not helpful to like obsess over that micro detail, because the bigger picture is what we're really trying to accomplish here. There's been a lot of effort spent in trying to convince people that you individually are the reason for these challenges that we're facing with plastics. And what I'm trying to tell you here is that's not entirely true. This is an all of us problem, and we all need to work together. And we all, with the collective us created this problem, the collective us can fix it, right? But so it goes beyond each of us individually. And really, this is the kind of question that I think many of us are asking when we like look at problems in the world. There are big, complex problems out there, and we do care, but we're busy. We've got our own lives. We've got our own day jobs. So how can we make progress on this? And the suggestion that I would have to everyone here is think globally, right? Understand what the big picture is and understand the broader context of what you're doing. But really the opportunity for most of us to act is locally in our own communities, like with our neighbors, with our religious groups, with our schools, whatever the case may be, right? In Stow. Here's a little bit of a crazy graphic, but I just think this is very cool. So this is actually a study that looked at correspondence between diplomats at the League of Nations. So this was like before the United Nations, there was the League of Nations. And so this is a map of the networks of different diplomats writing to each other. So, right? And so you've got sort of big important countries in the middle, the great powers, and you've got little clusters on the sides here. That's just what this is. But if you ask yourself the question, okay, we've got a problem and we need people to change their behavior. How do we make that happen? That's actually not a simple question. So let me ask you this, like, who's the most like influential person you could imagine? Maybe it's the president of the United States. Maybe it's Taylor Swift. Maybe it's Tom Brady. I don't know. Right. But if you, Oprah Winfrey, right, you can imagine that there are very, very influential people out there. And you might ask yourself, oh, that's obvious then. The way in which that we can make changes is to convince one of those people to be at the center of the network and broadcast the change hither and yon, far and wide. But actually, counterintuitively, that's not actually the way that change tends to move through populations. I think one really important thing to keep in mind is that the best predictor for whether you do something is how many of your neighbors do it, right? So for example, if you wear your seatbelt, the best predictor of whether you do that is whether the people around you wear their seatbelt. And what that means is actually important behavior changes really need to start in these smaller groups on the side, because if you're in one of these smaller groups, it's a lot easier for you to reach that critical mass of an idea becoming sort of everywhere you see, right? A town like Stow is easier to affect than the whole state of Massachusetts, than the whole country, than the whole world. And then what tends to happen is that, you can overcome with effort the sort of like social aspect of like, oh, I want to do something new, but it's a lot easier to get the community to take on something if it's a smaller group. And then what this study showed is that, you might have an important connector that brings an idea from one town, one group of diplomats to another. And then that might spread to other smaller groups. And then before long, only then, right, when you're one of these big influential players in the middle, do you look around you and say, oh, this new behavior is all around me. I think it's time for me to adopt it. It's safe to do that because people around have done it. So it's really, really important for us to realize that if we want to make change in this world, sure, we want to have a big picture plan. We all have dreams about changing the world for the better, but it starts with these smaller communities at the edge of the network. And I think that's something that's really important for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about plastics and also anything else that's important to us. So that's very abstract. From a practical standpoint, like we really have seen that, every single person has something to contribute if you have the opportunity to, if you want to change the world, right? If you want to change the behavior of your community. Just thinking at this, using this graphic from the World Oceans Day at the aquarium a few years ago, right? We're talking about plastics, right? We had someone with the skills to make a map and organize the data of which towns have taken action on plastic bags. We had someone who really enjoys talking with people and interacting with the community, a real extrovert. So in other words, not me, talking with all of the participants and the kids and sort of sharing the messages that we wanted people to hear. We had people who have some skill in art to like find graphical ways of depicting the issue. We had people who are just really like want to be in the background and work on data analysis. So that's a figure that you've seen before in this slideshow. But all of these skill sets really do matter. And this is a way that we can sort of, so if you feel like, oh, I don't have experience, I don't have, you know, the skills or the knowledge, that's not as important as it is to find that community. Which one of these circles could you be? What is the community that allows you to help make change happen? So I did hear from a Sustainable Stow that there is a effort underway to look at regulating plastic bags in town. So I just wanted to finish off this presentation with a specific case study that's sort of centered around plastic bags in Massachusetts. But in order for that to work, I want to just share the starting point. So before anyone in Massachusetts started thinking about regulating plastic bags, I wanted to talk about just what the scale of the issue was for plastic bags in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts has about 7 million residents. And then if you go out and dig, there's statistics nationwide average is that the average person uses about 350 plastic grocery bags per year, give or take. So if you multiply that out, the state of Massachusetts, before people started working on plastic bags, was generating about 2.5 billion plastic bags per year. I don't know about you, but billion is too big a number for me to personally comprehend. So I'm going to just try to break that down. Massachusetts has about 1,500 miles of coastline. So Cape Cod, the Martha's Vineyard that you can see here, the South Shore, the South Coast, all the way up to the North Shore, Gloucester, Salisbury, Newburyport. 1,500 miles of coastline. If you break that down to every foot of coastline, 2.5 billion bags equates to about 300 bags for every foot of coastline per year. So if you just imagine yourself standing anywhere along this beach and looking at 1 foot of it, 300 bags is the number that was being generated in the state. Does that help you visualize the scale of the issue? If you go and look up what this many bags costs, this is actually something like on the order of 150 or 160 million dollars worth of plastic bags. Like if you go out to Walmart and like buy bags in bulk, that's roughly speaking what you're paying for that many bags. And so this is a fantastic example of like, oh, each individual isn't doing very much, but when you have this many people, it really does add up. So what can we do about this? Well, I think many of you on this call already know, right? But this is the town meeting petition warrant for Sudbury. And I always share this just because it blows my mind how low the barrier it is for creating legislation here in Massachusetts towns, right? This is true everywhere in Massachusetts, so it's probably true for Stow, but in the town of Sudbury, where I'm from, you need 10 valid signatures in order to put legislation on the town meeting warrant. And so I highlight this to people because when people are like, oh, the world is so overwhelming, like national politics is so challenging, I like to remind folks that like we have the luxury of living in a place where direct democracy is still really, really alive. And in fact, the barrier for making change is a lot lower than a lot of people think. And so whatever your issue is, plastic bags or something else that you want to see change in your community, I just wanted to remind folks that this is something that we can do in a lot of towns here in Massachusetts. And that's like a privilege and a right that we have that not a lot of people do, and something that we should at least be aware of, and if not, take advantage of. So what did this mean? So before 1990, there were no plastic bag laws in Massachusetts at all. No regulation whatsoever on this subject. But on tax day, April 15th, 1990, the little island of Nantucket passed basically the first restriction on single-use plastics, I believe, in the entire world. So the first in the world to act on this issue was right here in Massachusetts. It was the island of Nantucket. And then, so they stood out and not a lot happened for many, many years until 2012, when the town of the city of Brookline, and many might know Clint Richmond from the Sierra Club, but he led an effort in Brookline to ban plastic bags. In 2013, a couple more towns caught on. And then I'm just going to start clicking through this. 2014, 2015, 2016, more towns are signing on, realizing what their neighbors are doing, seeing that it's possible to regulate this without harming the economy in any material way. 2017, 2018, people are realizing that, wow, I mean, plastic bags aren't the only part of the problem, but it's one of those items where there's like a really sensible replacement for, the reusable bag that many of us, that's cost effective, easily available, really no drawbacks, right? 2019 was a really big year. 2020, things slowed down a little bit because of the pandemic, and also because the fact that Massachusetts is starting to saturate with plastic bag laws. Now, we haven't covered everywhere, but sort of by the end of 2023, there were 158 local laws passed on plastic bags in the state of Massachusetts. And it's a little higher now because there were a handful more done in 2024. So it's in the low 160s now. These laws, if you know the geography of Massachusetts, these laws collectively cover 70% of the residents in the state of Massachusetts now. And if you do some back of the envelope math about how effective bag laws are, and people do still need trash bags and things, but we've probably taken collectively through the work of Surfrider and many, many other allied organizations, local, statewide, and otherwise, we've probably taken more than 1 billion bags per year out of circulation, right? This is truly significant impact. And if you're like the resident of a tiny town on the Cape, like Aquinnah, like population 366, and you're like, why are we even bothering doing this? It's because these little actions, when they get multiplied across a larger scale, really start to make a difference, right? Numerically. So I just wanted to share a little bit what that landscape was. I mean, it's been a long journey, right? It's been 1990, 2012. It's been 10 years since like things started moving again. But the collective work of local activists everywhere has really made a difference and has really reduced our dependence on a particular plastic item that really doesn't need to be disposable, right? And so the conclusion here is, change starts with our personal decisions, right? We affect our own lives first. And then you start talking, but then that builds into local action. And then our dream as an organization is that we can take this statewide. And eventually, we are changing our country and the world. So I'm going to close with just a quote that I find very personally impactful. But I want to say that if you think you are too small to make a difference, then try sleeping in a tent with a mosquito. So let us be mosquitoes for good. Let us see what we can do together as a community and tackle this honestly big problem that is plastics. But joining and then see what we can do to help make a difference. So I'm going to end it there. I'd be so happy to take any questions that people have. And then my contact details are here as well. So feel free to reach out to me at a later date if you would like.
Thank you, Alex. Great talk, better than I expected. I hadn't seen all your slides before. That was terrific. So we have a couple of questions in the chat right now. In no particular order, and then we can take others that people may have. Marion asks, are there fragments of plastic in the air we breathe?
Short answer, yes. I know this because I am friends and I've worked with a group that has done studies on microfiber releases from like dryer events. So like, for example, if you wash your fleece and you put it into the dryer, and then all the lint goes out, some of it's caught in the trap, some of it ends up outside. And they actually did studies based on dryer, of dryer lint vents. And then they sort of took that basic idea and actually started doing air sampling along the Hudson River, right? Looking for where microplastics and microfibers were being found. And the conclusion of those studies is that yes, it is very much in the air and being transported through the air. And presumably, if it's true in Vermont and it's true in the Hudson River Valley, it's true in a lot of places. So I would say that is a thing that's happening.
Arnie has a question here live. You'll have to unmute yourself there, Arnie.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
can.
Great. Oh, thank you, Alex. That was a terrific presentation. I'm going to take you in a little bit of a different direction. I know this is probably not the focus of this isn't the focus of what you're talking about. But what we understand is plastics are generated from the petrochemical industry, that we understand that the petrochemical industry is looking in the future from switching to from using fossil fuels to creating more and more plastic bags and other plastic items.
Mhm.
Do you have any data that you can share with us on the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon footprint associated with the production and disposal of plastics?
Um, I I do. I'm just thinking, so the trade industry that supports the plastics industry, they actually publish very detailed life cycle analyses of how much greenhouse gas impact different types of plastics generate. And so those data are published and widely available. And I would be happy to dig up the reference and send it along to you, or if that would be useful.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Can I, yeah, just make sure you, Arnie, if you make sure to get some contact details in the chat, and I'll look for it before this shuts down.
I'll put it in.
Thanks.
And so I'm going to go back to the chat for a question. John asks, anything that can be done to increase the likely recycling of plastic bags, for instance, to sort at collection points or sort bags with color markings, etc.?
I think the fact is, I'm sure there's ways you could improve the recycling, but the fact is, in order for recycling to be economical, the fundamental challenge is you've got to separate out all the different materials that exist and make sure that they're as clean and contaminant free as possible. And so in the world of plastic bags, that really means like clean, dry plastic film of like one specific or two specific resins with no contaminants on, no paper bits, no sticker. So at the end of the day, what I really encourage people to think about is by the time waste is generated, you've already like lost the battle in a sense, because anything that feels like it would be challenging to do, right? Like the idea that, oh, we're going to make this plastic recycling system perfect so we can collect the exactly raw material is in fact challenging to do, right? Separating things is hard, especially given the way that products are made and products are used, right? So while, yeah, I'm sure there's ways that you can like work with human psychology to get the recycling system more efficient. I mean, realistically, the better solutions, in my opinion, would be to look further up the chain, right? Like the best thing would be to not reduce, reuse, recycle in that order but in that order, right, is something that you've all heard. So the best thing you can do is probably to just not use plastics that you don't need to, and find ways to get our neighbors to do that as well. But the second thing is further up the chain as well, and that's designing products so that they are easier to deal with at the end of their life, right? Mixing fewer things together. And there's definitely voluntary actions that some businesses have done in that respect, but there's also, this is more like state and federal type of regulation, right? That's not something a town can do, but there are definitely policy choices that the state could make to encourage, through financial incentives, producers to be more responsible for the materials that they produce, right? If companies are made to be financially and legally responsible for the waste that they produce, they are naturally going to design in aspects to make things easier, right? So if we have finite energy to spend, I would suggest looking as far upstream as we personally believe that we can reach, right? Both in the use and then also in the encouragement of businesses through our dollars, but also our political process to work towards designing, making recycling work better, right? That's what I would suggest.
Great. Mike, I see you got your hand up.
Yes, Alex, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Sort of following along with what you've said recently, I'm wondering, it seems to me that this is an enormous behavioral problem. It's an enormous economic problem, considering the mass consumption of plastics and how very many ways we use them. So it may be that some interim steps might make the problem a little smaller while we try to push upstream, limiting the production of plastics. I'm wondering, it seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like there are a wide variety of plastics. And I'm wondering if constraining that set to a fewer set of plastics could help in the recycling efforts.
I think that is true. I think in general, the challenge of recycling is not necessarily the chemistry or the engineering aspect of once you have a pure material, how do you process it to make it something useful? The challenge in recycling is you have hundreds of different materials mixed up together with different kinds of contamination, and you have to split them apart before you can do anything useful with them. Like fundamentally, that's the challenge. And like I said, there's a number of regulatory and there's a number of legal tools, legislative tools that, for example, the state could use to try to push businesses to localize on a set of plastics that are less toxic and easier to handle and easier to sort. So that's absolutely something that can be done. The challenge of sort of implementing that politically is significant, as you might imagine. But you're absolutely right that if you can make the sorting problem easier by having fewer colors of M&Ms to sort, that would be something that could move the needle.
And if I could just ask sort of a follow-up, what about the giant problem of behavioral change among all of us? Have you any thoughts on how you might work that into the problem?
Listen, if we had full answers, right? Like, I'd go and do something else with my life, right? But that's what I was getting at with sort of that slide, sort of on like a model of behavior change. That's super, super condensed, but there have been academics and researchers, right, who have made entire careers and lives out of studying this simple problem. How do you get people to change their behavior? It's not easy, right? But I think I'll just emphasize, like, if you go dig through that literature, I think one of the most key findings, the two findings that I found most interesting are it is the amount of people around you who do something that best predicts whether you also do that, right? So, and you can push through that. You could be like, I'm going to be a lone wolf and like do this recycling thing. And you can do that, but it takes energy, right? That's not the easiest way. But if you can create an environment where it is safe and normal for people to do a behavior, like where everyone around them is doing it, then odds are many people will follow along, right? And that's sort of the place that we are with plastics in a lot of, at least Massachusetts, right? It's like people are starting to talk about it. People are thinking about it more and more. And it's making it safe and normal to be thoughtful about this problem. There's a lot more to do, right? But that is a key aspect of it. And I think the second sort of like really eye-catching aspect is that ideas and behavior actually seem to spread through populations differently, right? We've all heard of the idea of like something going viral, like a cat video or something of that nature. The literature says that those kind of ideas spread differently through a population than behavior change is spreading through. Right. Ideas spread easier because there's less sort of like investment that you have to make into changing your behavior. So there's a lot of really fascinating research on the topic. And I think that it's not an easy one, but there are a lot of interesting tools, at least to help understand what's happening there.
I think we've got two more questions that I can think of. One in the chat that I'm going to use as a kind of a last question, perhaps.
Sure.
And so I'm going to go to Becky right now.
So, thank you. This is a great talk. But I'm thinking about like going to the grocery store and getting produce, and
Mhm.
all the produce is they give you these plastic bags at the grocery store for produce.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if there's been any push to get grocery stores to use like compostable plastic bags for that purpose. Like, are you aware of any?
Sure. There's a couple of towns that have attempted to regulate produce bags at the same time that they work on other plastic bags. Um, so I I want to say Williamstown did it, and back in like they were one of the early, and so they have some regulations on produce bags. So there are places that are much fewer than the grocery, like the checkout bags. But there are places that like try to do this legislatively. Um, I think that that's a little bit of a harder challenge, right? Because there's the substitution for a grocery bag is fairly obvious. But like if you are buying, like when I go to the grocery store, if I buy like a carrot, I don't put it in a plastic bag, just personally, right? But like if I'm buying green beans or something like that, like there is an advantage in having a bag, and sometimes I have a reusable bag that I can do for that, sometimes not, right? But there are definitely like personal items that I've figured out to try to just reduce my use of that stuff. And then there are definitely towns out there in Massachusetts, a handful, that have attempted to regulate that in a more sort of formal way.
Thank you. So maybe this is the last question. I don't know. We've got one from Peggy. What is the town of Stow doing to ban plastic bags? So, there's the penultimate question in a way. John, Arnie, one of you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I can talk to it. I'm a member of the town has a green advisory committee, and I'm on that committee. Arnie is the chair. We do have a warrant article that our green advisory committee intends to put forward at the May town meeting, and it would be a plastic bag reduction bylaw. I'll describe it a little bit and then sort of want to ask a question for Alex. The for the detail, our plastic bag reduction bylaw is going to be for retail situations. So whether it's you go to a restaurant and get takeout, or we have one supermarket, you go to Shaw's and buy food. The bags at the registers, if the warrant article is passed in May, then both of those instances, a plastic bag, a thin plastic bag, can't be used. It has to be paper or reusable or other material. So that's what our bylaw would do, and it will be voted on in May. The thing I wanted to ask Alex is that just you comment on our bylaw. What we're proposing in May is not a full ban. That is to say, just as somebody described, when you go to Shaw's and you buy 3 onions, you put them in a little bag. We don't propose to not allow that. We don't have any, has to be compostable. If you go to the fish counter and you get a plastic bag to keep the fish smell out of everything, we don't regulate that. If you buy potato chips and they're in a bag, if you buy pretzels, they're in a bag. So just wanted to say what it is and what it isn't. We regulate the bylaw would restrict, would not allow at retail a thin plastic bag. But it doesn't affect when you're in the store. And it also has an exemption if you have a thick plastic bag, ones that you sometimes pay 10 cents for, and it's reusable. It's intended to be used multiple times. That's allowed. And we also allow the apple orchards for pick your own, who they tend to have these big plastic bags. We allow them. Those are some of the exceptions. So sort of a long answer, but the question for Alex is, we're not attempting to restrict everything. you can still go get takeout, and the store may put forks and napkins in a plastic bag in your paper bag for takeout. Our concern was if we just restrict everything, can't everything plastic, that we would put a burden on the retail side and face unwanted opposition.
I'm not sure I correctly picked the question out of that, but
Well, it's just that strategy, we don't.
Yeah.
I think one approach could be that we wouldn't allow any plastic bags. You couldn't have one in the store for putting your onions in. You couldn't have one for fish. You couldn't have one even if it's thick.
yep.
Um,
I think that's a very sensible approach. And in fact, I can think of almost nowhere in the United States, certainly, maybe where the idea is that you're banning all plastic bags. Like that just isn't a policy that makes sense in many cases, because you do have like cases where you want to use a disposable thing to protect against contamination, right? Like you mentioned fish, but what about like paint and chemicals? Like so there are almost always there are exemptions for cases where the substitution isn't easy, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense to take a look at what the uses of and what the things that can be substituted reasonably are. And different places have fallen on different sort of balance points in that space, but almost nobody is going in and saying, oh, we want to ban literally all plastic bags, right? Like you can still go buy trash bags in a box for your kitchen if that's what you want to do. I think the key here is one psychology thing to think about is that free stuff, right, gets treated very differently than stuff you pay for. And so one of the important things to regulate is sort of like the free distribution of these the free and infinite distribution of these plastic items, because then people fundamentally treat them as disposable. Anything that you have to pay a bit of money for flips a switch in most people's brains and gets them to be a lot more thoughtful. And ultimately, it's like, that is a level of personal freedom and choice that, makes sense to me personally, but it's really that sort of unnecessary free distribution, which is where a lot of the local laws are pointed at.
And Sue Abrams here from Williamstown, long ways away from Stow, notes that a fee on all carryout bags is the best way to nudge consumers to bring their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. That is the best policy. There is a legal reason why it's towns in Massachusetts can't implement that on their own. They have to go through the state legislature. But from a just strictly getting stuff done perspective, that is absolutely true. I agree with that statement.
Mike, you've got a question.
Yes, so as John's question points out, the subject of drafting a bylaw to do a simple thing like minimizing the use of plastic bags can be pretty complicated. Does Surfrider have like a template bylaw so you can give to people who are interested in doing things like that, and they can modify it, but at least you cover the fundamentals, cover the points that you feel are important?
Short answer, we sure do. So, and we've worked on a variety of different issues, but for most of the common sort of things that people try to tackle on the single-use plastic front, straws, disposal utensils, polystyrene, we have a pretty good sense of what we would recommend to most folks as policy. And it again, there's legal details which we can talk about if people are interested, but it would matter if you were the town of Stow or the city of Stow here in Massachusetts. And so like the policy does change. It matters, whether you want your Board of Health dealing with this or whether you want DPW dealing with this or you want some other agency, right? So there's local details, but the policy has been pretty well hashed out, right? Like there's hundreds of these laws that have been in place for up to a decade or more in many cases, right? And we have a pretty good sense of what tends to work well and what tends to not work well. We have a sense of what tends to gather opposition, what tends to us go through smoothly. And so those are all resources that we as an organization are happy to share if that is of interest.
Great, thank you.
That might be. Thank you, Alex. So I think we're just about done. I'd note that we've got one more suggestion in the chat from Peggy, that I reuse all plastic bags that come into the house, especially grape bags, and use them as produce bags. Yeah, we use all the plastic bags that come into this house, sometimes just as garbage bags for moving scraps to the compost, but we have a bag of bags, so.
None of us are going to be perfect at what we do. That's just the fact. But the fact that you're thinking about it, that the fact that you're talking with your neighbors and friends about it, right? That's what we need to sort of make that collective change that we need to see.
Well, I want to thank you. I think we've hit most of the questions or points and I encourage anybody, look at the chat before we shut down, because there's a few comments in there that are really good. And I want to thank you, Alex. It's been great. I have a feeling we're going to talk to you again in a while. Hopefully this passes our town meeting this spring and we move on to the next stage of the plastics battle next year, but fingers crossed, one step at a time.
All right. Best of luck, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for spending the time with us this evening. It's great.
All right. Have a good night, Al.
Thank you,
night.
Alex.